Okay, hello, thank you for coming to my house, to Freda's house. Today is the yard site of the Rebbe's mother, Rebbetzin Chana. The Rebbe's mother was a very intelligent woman. She was very well educated. This is a time that girls didn't go to school at all. She was taught at home. She was very smart. So her parents, her father taught her, and she was pashat amalomedes. She was a learned woman in Torah, and lahavla other chochmas as well. The Rebbe's mother was a very knowledgeable lady. People who knew her said that she was always busy reading and studying. She was always busy using her brain. In addition, the Rebbetzin Chana was blessed with an incredibly gracious personality. She had very, very good social skills, which is one of the greatest gifts anybody could use today. She was incredibly likable. She was one of those people who was warm and genuine and forward. She liked people, and people were very drawn to her all of her life. And part of her ability to be the Rebbetzin, not so much in New York, but when she was the wife of the Rav in Yekaterinslav, which is a very, very difficult Rabbanus, was her grace. She was a very likable woman. She was pastor before I was born, but I know people who have told me she'd sit on the corner of Kingston and President, where she lived, and just greet people. She'd just say hello to people. Crown Heights in the 1950s and early 60s was a very mixed community. You had every kind of frum Jew. What is now Borough Park was then Crown Heights. They ran away to Borough Park, but Crown Heights was full of every community. You had Chassidim and Misnagdim, you had modern Orthodox, every kind of Yid. And the Rebbetzin, if she saw a new face, would say hello. The Rebbetzin would go to shul all the time, Shabbos and Yom Tov, and she didn't know who you were. She wasn't embarrassed. She walked over to you, she shook your hand. I'm talking a lady to a lady, was machst du, and where you're from. And she had all kinds of comments. She would often say, my son told me that you were coming, and things like this. She had an enormous amount of charisma and grace and charm. She was a very likable person. She was also very, very talented. I heard a man who knew her as a child describe the Rebbetzin as embodying music. She was so musical it came out of her pores. She was a very big balas chush. A lot of the characteristics you see in the Rebbe, people say you saw in his mother. I want to talk to you about the end of her life. I have, for whatever my reasons, I'm not going to talk to you about her whole life. I'm just going to tell you some stories and I'm going to go. I want to talk to you about the end of her life. The end of her life was that, of course, she got out of Russia, and like all the Lubavitcher Hasidim, she ended up in what's called DP camps, displaced persons camps, where all the people who survived the Holocaust ended up. The Lubavitcher Hasidim were Russians, but they snuck out of Russia using Polish passports, because a lot of Polish Yidden ran away from the Nazis into Russia and then died in Russia. The Lubavitcher Hasidim bought those passports, changed the pictures, did what they had to do, and they came out as Polish bidding, as if they were Polish citizens, because Stalin made an agreement with the Polish government, that he would allow every Polish citizen living in Russia to go back to Poland, and every Russian citizen living in Poland, he wanted them back in Russia. So about 13 or 1400 Lubavitcher Hasidim, my father's Lagzud was one of them, got out of Russia with these Polish papirim, with these fake Polish papers. And one of them was the Rebbe's mother. And they had to go through a bunch of borders. And the people who led them across was called the Bricha. Bricha were young Israelis. This is before Eretz Yisrael was even yet a state. This is 1946. Eretz Yisrael was officially declared an independent state in 1948. And the Rebbetzin Chana used to refer to those young Israelis as tzaddikim on tefillin. They were not frum. Boys and girls from Israel who came to Europe and literally risked their lives, because if they would have gotten caught, they would have gotten shot. And they smuggled them across many borders, from Russia to Poland, from Poland to Czechoslovakia, from Czechoslovakia probably to Austria, from Austria probably to Germany. And every border was bribed. The whole thing was one big operation. And the Chassidim schlepped from Russia, and they ended up in the DP camps, displaced persons camps in Germany. My father was never in Poki, my father was in Austria. But most of the Lubavitcher Chassidim were in Germany, where the Rebbe's mother was. The Rebbe's mother, I guess, was fast-tracked. Some people stayed in Poki until 48, maybe even till 49. Till 49, they were still about to living in Germany. The Rebbe's mother was allowed to leave Germany and move to France as early as 1947. I don't know what the logistics were, But certainly part of the logistics were that the Rebbe had a son living in America. She had another son, as you may or may not know, living in Israel. The Rebbe had a brother named Label, Yisrael Ayaleb, living in Israel. The way the story goes is that she actually wanted to move to Israel and live with her younger son. But the then British mandate, who had jurisdiction over Israel, would not let her in. So the plans were changed, and it was decided that she should move to New York and join the Rebbe. So she left Germany and she came to Paris, and she stayed by a cousin. There was a Yid in France named Zalman Schneerson. Zalman Schneerson's father and the Rebbe's father's father were brothers. Zalman Schneerson and the Blevik were first cousins. And she stayed in their home. The Rebbe traveled by ship from America to France. It was the only time he left New York after he came here in 1941. He arrived in France. People went to pick him up at the ship. And the Rebbe was already in the taxi coming in. A telegram came to Zalman Schneerson's house. Baruch Bayach al-Shalom, telling the Fiedeke sent the Rebbe a telegram. Baruch Bayach al-Shalom. They went outside and the Rebbe's taxi drove up. He didn't need anybody to pick him up from the airport. He did fine by himself. And the Rebbe went to see his mother. There are people who remember that first meeting. The Rebbe hadn't seen his mother in 18 years. The meeting was deeply, deeply emotional. The Rebbe didn't stay in the house. The Rebbe took a hotel room. And for the 3 months that the Rebbe was in France, he would visit his mother every day twice. In the morning and in the afternoon, they would spend time, they would talk. The Rebbe had, I hate to use this word, but this is probably the right word, a lot of guilt about the fact that he left his parents behind. His father was basically killed. His father died from suffering in the Fashikung, in the exile in Asia. His mother had aged a lot. She was then she passed away probably 85, so she was close to 70 years old, exhausted and not well. And the Rebbe's meeting her mother was a very big deal for the two of them. It was also very fortuitous for Anash. The Lubavitcher Chassidim were also coming from Russia and were beginning to think about starting normal lives. They would come to France, and then from France they would go either to Israel or to America. And some of the Chassidim went to England, some of the Chassidim went to places in Europe, some of the Chassidim went to South America, some of the Chassidim went to Australia. And France was sort of the stopping stone, and a lot of people got to meet our Rebbe, who was then called the Ramash. He wasn't yet the Rebbe when the Rebbe came to see his mother. One of the interesting stories is that there was a man, I think he was a lawyer, I think he was an attorney, and he was involved in helping people get papers. And one day a man walks into his office and says to him, "I'd like you to help my mother get into the United States in an oifen v'zol zayin on bittul Torah. I want you to learn in America in a way that's not going to cause me to waste time for my learning." This man was a frum Jew and very learned, but no one would ever come to him and say, "Help my mother get into America, it shouldn't cost bittul Torah." He was taken aback, and the Rebbe says, "I learn every minute, and the more you can expedite my mother's coming into America, the less time I'll have to spend on it, and I'll be able to learn Torah, and that'll be your schus." This man was very impressed by this, and he helped the Rebbe. When the Rebbe was a Rebbe, he would come to Fabrengens, and the Rebbe would always bring him up on the dais and honor him for the fact that he had helped his mother get into the United States in the kind of way that it didn't take a lot of the Rebbe's time. He did the work for him. And I'm going to skip. There's a lot of details and a lot of stories. Bottom line, they spent about 3 months in France from before Pesach till after Shavuos, and they came back together to the United States of America. There were a few Bacharim who had an idea. The Rebbe was not the Rebbe yet. He was just the son of the Rebbe. And said, the Rebbe, the Ramash is coming with his mother. Let's go to the shipyard. Let's be makabel upon him. They knew that it would mean something to the Rebbe, that when he came with his mother should see that the Chassidim were coming to greet them. So they went to the ship. One of those Yungamait was a Bachar named Berel Baumgarten, a very famous Chassid, who's deceased now also almost 50 years, 45 years. And they came to the shipyard, and when the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin got off the ship, they were there to be makabel pneim, and the Rebbe was very, very happy. And he told them, "Thank you for coming." And the Rebbe brought his mother to Crown Heights. I don't know what the arrangement was, but the Rebbetzin took her own apartment. The Rebbetzin took an apartment. Her first apartment was on Kingston and St. John's. It's past Eastern Parkway. People know where she lived. The house still exists. And I think initially she actually boarded by a woman. She took a room in someone's house. Later on, she took an apartment in 1418 President Street, which is now the boys' dormitory. It's on the corner of Kingston and President. And one of the stories that goes around about why the Rebbetzin moved is because the Rebbe would go visit his mother every day. And please don't try this yourself because you're not a Rebbe. The Rebbe would cross Eastern Parkway in the middle of the street, and he wouldn't hesitate and he wouldn't look, he'd just walk. And the cars would screech and beep. And in 1949, the speed limit at Eastern Parkway was not 25 miles an hour, it was 50 miles an hour. And there was 3 lanes in both directions. There was no turning lane. And the cars were flying, and they just ran across the street. And every day there was nissim that the Rebbe got across the street without getting hurt. And the Rebbe's mother said, I cannot stomach that my son is doing something so reckless. And of course, she told him that maybe he should go to the corner and wait by the light and cross like a normal person. They would just cross the street. So the Rebbetzin said, I want to move to the other side of Eastern Parkway so there won't be on me that my son is crossing Eastern Parkway. So she took a apartment. As I said, that she moved to resident in Kingston. She was there the last few years of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. She was always welcome in the Frierdiker Rebbe's home. She probably ate all the meals of Shabbos there. She certainly ate the meals of Yom Tov there. I don't know if you've ever seen the inside of the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment, but the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment has a very large dining room where the men sat, and there's a dinette. There's a kitchen, and there's a separate room for the dinette where the women sat. And once the Rebbe's mother came to New York, she was welcome in that home. She also ate in the same dira with the Frierdiker Rebbe, while the Rebbe was in the other room with the men. When the Frierdiker passed away, there was a big issue about who should be the next Rebbe. The Rebbe's mother, first of all, she knew what was going to happen. And second of all, she was the Rebbe's #1 fan. She was on the Rebbe's team, you know what I'm saying? The Rebbe's mother. You must understand that before the Rebbe got married, she had already spoken with the Frierdiker Rebbe about the Rebbe becoming a Rebbe. The Rebbe's mother was told by her husband, the Rebbe's father, go to the Frierdiker Rebbe and talk about the Shidduch and talk that the Rebbe is going to be the next. When the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, people came to the Rebbe and they said, your mother discussed it before you got engaged, that you're going to be the next Rebbe. And the Rebbe, he didn't say it wasn't true, he simply said, but the Frierdiker Rebbe never told me. So she was very, very behind the team that was trying to get the Rebbe elected as a Rebbe. What's weird is, we have her journal. The Rebbe's mother, Rebbetzin Chana, kept a diary, a journal. She makes no reference, not to the Frierdiker Rebbe passing away, not to all the politics, who's going to be the next Rebbe, and not even to the fact that the Rebbe becomes Rebbe. It's not recorded. She didn't write a word of it. And I think she understood that people would later see her journal, and so she was careful not to write things down that she didn't want people to know. But she was so proud of the Rebbe. And she was so happy that her husband's wish that the Rebbe should be a Rebbe materialized, and she was a very proud mother. The Rebbetzin Chana was a very, very proud mother. One of the more compelling stories, I think, is that the Rebbe, our Rebbe, was like a clock. Even I remember this. If the Rebbe walked into shul for davening, which was 10 o'clock, and the clock said 9:59, the clock was wrong. Every time. If the Rebbe was supposed to come into Fabeng at 1:30, and the clock said 1:31, the clock was wrong. The Rebbe was prompt to the minute. It's not normal. I'm telling you it's not normal. The Rebbe was exactly on time. The Fabrengen that the Rebbe scheduled, which he said his first Maimah Basi Lagani, and he announced that he's becoming a Rebbe officially, was called for 8:30. The room was packed. You couldn't walk. You couldn't get a spindle into that room. And the Rebbe showed up 9:20, almost an hour late, which was very out of character to the Rebbe, especially in those days. Where was the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Why did he come 50 minutes late to his maiden Fabrengen as a Rebbe? And the answer is he was talking to his mother. On Yud Shvat, Tafshin Yud Aleph, before the Fabrengen, the Rebbe went to see his mother. The conversation took apparently longer than the Rebbe expected. Nobody knows what the conversation was like. I suspect, and I don't know, that the Rebbe's mother had messages for the Rebbe from the Rebbe's father, who was not zeicher to see this. And the Rebbe came almost an hour late to his maiden Fabrengen because he was spending time with his mother. And it reflects how deeply connected the Rebbe was to his mother and how much she was a part of the beginning of the Rebbe's Nesias. She always wanted to know what's happening in 770. She came to shul. Every Shabbos she came to shul, Yom Tov she came to shul. As she got older, it was harder for her to walk, so she came less frequently, but she came to shul a lot. Girls, I'll give you an illustration for this, okay? You know how 770 looks? I hope the answer to that question is yes, yeah? 770, on the Eastern Parkway side, it has what they call, I don't know, 3 shuls or 4 shuls, I don't know how many you count. The very, very back, the last shul where the balcony is, yeah? You know what I'm talking about, the last shul? So when you go into that last shul, you go down 2 steps and you make a right. The wall is on a 45-degree angle. It's not a right angle. It goes like this. Remember? You know why that is? That was Mizrach. And that was the Rebbe's mother's spot. That was the front of the shul way back when. When they built the first shul, that was the end of the shul. The whole big shul was one room. And they made the women's section on an angle so that Rebbetzin Chana's chair, instead of facing the front, was facing sideways, so she could look down and see her son. The angle in the Weibishul that's still there, Ad Hayom Hazeh, was built for the Rebbe's mother to look from her seat at the Rebbe, her son. And the Rebbe very frequently would look up at her and she would look at the Rebbe, and there was something very special going on between them. I'm sure you've all seen the beautiful chair the Rebbe had. There was a red chair with red upholstery. The Rebbetzin Chana had an identical chair with velvet of green. That was her seat. Just like the Rebbe had a chair, they made a matching chair for the Rebbe's mother, and she sat in shul. The crazy thing is, the day she passed away on Shabbos, Vav Tishrei, Pashas Adinu, a candle fell over, and it caught fire, and the chair was burnt to ash. The day she passed away by Tzaddikim, sometimes they take their stuff with them, we don't need to have it. The day she passed away, a fire fell over, a candle fell over, the chair caught fire, was destroyed. There's no zecher of that chair. But the Rebbe was very involved. She came to shul. And she was the Rebbe's cheerleading committee. She wanted very much that the Rebbe should be more of a Rebbe and the Chassidim should like him, or this was her business. One of the stories that they tell is that when the Rebbe had his 25th wedding anniversary, Yudal Kisef Tafshin Yudal, 1953, the Rebbetzin asked people, so are they fabrengi for the Rebbetzin was the one who told people, no one knew when the Rebbe's birthday was. The Rebbe said the Rebbe's birthday is Yudal of Nisan, you got to make a fabrengi. She wanted the Chassidim to fabreng Yudal of Nisan on the Rebbe's birthday. She wanted the Chassidim to fabreng on Yudal Kisef, the Rebbe's wedding anniversary. And when the Rebbe had his 25th anniversary, she asked people, who was there fabrenging? They said, yeah, this Chassid's fabrenging, that Chassid's fabrenging. Lepoil, the Rebbe fabrenged himself. Someone knocked on the Rebbe's door and said, my uncle was involved in your shidduch. My uncle never collected shatchanos. He was killed by the Nazis. I want to have shatchanos now. So the Rebbe says, what do you want? He says, I want to fabreng. So the Rebbe went into the shul, he fabrenged. After the fabrengen, as was his custom, he went to see his mother. He walks into his mother's house and very excited, his mother said, I heard that the Benzin, Shemtiv, and Pinya Alta is fabrenged for your 25th wedding anniversary. And the Rebbe said to his mother, I fabreng and they're getting the credit because it all happened very, very last minute. But the Rebbetzin was very proud of the Rebbe, and she was very much in favor of making him not only be great, but be respected and treated as great. One of the examples for this is the Rebbe made many organizations. One of the organizations was called Neshei of Bnei Chabad, Agudas Neshei of Bnei Chabad. When the Rebbe first became a Rebbe, almost the very beginning, the Rebbe made an organization for women, Neshei Chabad. You look at the early years, Neshei Chabad used to have a convention every year in Crown Heights, for Shavuos. By those conventions, you're talking now 1956, 1957, 1958, 1960, 1961, 1962, 1963, 1964. I don't know what her health condition was, but you look at the stage of the meetings of Neshei Chabad in all those years, and the Rebbe's mother was sitting on the dais. And people gave speeches, and she would say, this was a good speech, this wasn't such a good speech, this could have been better. The Rebbetzin Chana was outspoken. If she liked your speech, she told you. If she didn't like your speech, she also told you. But the Rebbetz's mother was very much a part of what was going on in Lubavitch. She was very, very proud of the Rebbe. And of course, one of the more poignant stories, which I'm sure you know, and it's now been corroborated, it's actually true, because they found the notes. The Rebbe lost his brother in 1952, 13 years before she passed away. The Rebbe lost his brother in Tafshin Yud Beis after Pesach, Yud Gimel Iyar. And the Rebbe did not want his mother to know. His mother was elderly, his mother was ill, he didn't want her to know. So they created a ruse that lasted 13 years. The Rebbe's sister-in-law would write letters from England, they lived in Liverpool, and then she later moved to London. And the mail would come to the Rebbe's house, to her house. Berel Eunuch, who was very close to the Rebbe's mother, had a key to her mailbox. She would open the letter, the mailbox, and if she found a letter from her sister-in-law, he would bring it to 770. They knew how to open up a letter that you shouldn't see that it was opened. And the Rebbe would add a few lines in his brother's handwriting and sign Leib. And they once gave out like a list of 10 or 12 different examples of the Rebbe signing his brother's handwriting, Leib. His name was Yisrael Aya Leib, but he signed his name Leib. And for 13 years, the Rebbe's mother did not know that her son had passed away. There was a Jew whose name was Rebbe Cheskel Besser. He was a Gerach Chassid. He was very close to the Rebbe's brother, and he was close to the Rebbetzin, close to the Rebbe. He would travel a lot to Israel. He stopped often in England, and he was part of the ruse. He would bring letters from the Rebbetzin to his daughter-in-law, her daughter-in-law, and then back. And she would send pictures of he had a little girl growing up, a little Meidele. She's probably now in her 70s. Actually, she's probably closer to 80 now. Her name was Dalia. The Rebbe has a niece. And the sister-in-law would send pictures of the niece, and the Rebbetzin Chana always wanted to know, there's pictures of the niece, there's pictures, there's no, but the labels, none of the pictures. There was a simple reason why labeled on the pictures, because he wasn't around. But they gave all kinds of excuses. And for 13 years, this ruse was held up, so the Rebbe's mother should not know that her son had passed. Now there are some people who say, and I think it's not true, but some people still say it, that the Rebbetzin knew that the label had passed away. But she knew that if the Rebbe knew that she knew, the Rebbe would be upset. So each one was hiding from the other. So she lived in Crown Heights all those years. One of the things that she would do is that every year, on the yahrzeit of her husband, Rebbe Leivik, which is Chof Menachemov, she would invite Chassidim into her home for a farbrengen. And they would come, they would sit, she put food out on the table. She sat with them. And she would talk about her husband. People would speak. Every year she did this on the yahrzeit. I think she also did it on the Rebbe's anniversary, Dal Kislev, but she certainly did it on the yahrzeit of her husband. So he has two stories about those farbrengens. One of the stories was, there was a Yid, a very, very special chassid, whose name was Shmaryo, Nocham Shmaryo Sasonkin. There may be Sasonkins in the room, they can go by many names now because there's so many generations. Nocham Shmaryo was an Adam Gadol, he was a Tomim, a big Rav, he was a Choshev Yid. And he knew that the Rebbe's mother is angry at him. For years, she was angry at him for years, for decades. Why was she angry at him? Because he learned in Lubavitch in the 10s. And in those days, if you had a yeshiva and you wanted to do fundraising, the Bocharim themselves would fundraise for the yeshiva. They were the best lawyers, the best advocates for yeshiva with the Bocharim. So the Bocharim would go around raising money. Shmerel Batumer, also Shmerel Sasonkin, went around to raise money, and he came to Yekaterinslav. Rebbe Leivik was the Yekaterinslav Alav. He was a Lubavitcher Chassid. He was in Lubavitch all the time. His children, the Rebbe and his brothers, were never in Lubavitch. But Rebbe Leivik visited the Rebbe Rashab quite often, and everybody knew him. And they called him Leivik. It wasn't Rebbe Leivik, it wasn't Rav Rebbe Leivik, it wasn't a Tzaddik, it was Leivik. But he was a Gadol. Leivik, the Rebbe's father, was a Gaon in Elam, in Kabbalah, and in Nigla, and Avodah. He was a big Tzaddik. So he knocks on the door of the Rebbetzin's apartment. The Rebbetzin opens the door, and the 16-year-old Bacha looks at her and says, Leivik is home. And she looks at him with angry eyes, like, you're calling my husband Leivik, you schmeckel. And she never forgave him. Anytime he saw her, 10 years later, 20 years later, 30, he would look at her and she would look at him, and she's still angry. He was once in New York doing one of these Chof of yahrzeits, and he got himself invited to her house. And he showed up. He came, he sat. And the Rebbe looked at her, the same look like, oh, here you are, yeah? Chutzpahnik, you call my husband Leivik. And at some point during the evening, she said, may I speak? She lay sure speak. So he told the following story, that the Gemara says that the greatest Tanoim were called the Rabbon, like Rabbon Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and so forth. Lower than Rabbon is a Rebbe, with a Yud. And lower than Rebbe is a Rav. Anybody who had Smicha from Eretz Yisrael was called Rebbe, and who had Smicha from Chutz La'aretz is called Rav. Then the Gemara says a funny thing. There's Rabbon, there's Rebbe, and there's Rav. And then the Gemara says, Gadol Mirav and Shmai. The greatest Tanaim in Amirayim, there was no Rebbe, it was just their name. Hillel, Shammai, Rav, Shmuel, there was no Rebbe, they just called them by their names. And he said, by Chassidim was the same way. The greatest Chassidim were a trademark. They were, there's a word that I'm not finding. They were a brand. So you didn't say Harav, Rebbe, you said Leivik. And the Rebbe, this Shmuel said, that's why Chassidim used to call even the greatest Chassidim by their name, because it's even greater than Rabbon. For example, he says, Leivik. And he saw that the Rebbetzin Chana forgave him for the 35-year-old grudge. He calmed her down. This is ein Maise. The zweite Maise is the last yahrzeit, 1964. She passed away 6 weeks later. They came to her home, And for whatever reason, she must have had a premonition. The entire time she talked about the last days of her husband before he passed away, which was very premonitory. It was very clear, like she was sensing that this is the end. And when the Fabrenga was over, she walked the Chassidim to the door. And by the door, she said the following. In my lifetime, I have seen many great men. I saw many great Rabbonim in Europe. My husband, she said. My father was a big Rav. Shinuk Deli Yisrael. But someone as great as my son, the Rebbe, someone as great as my son, I never saw such greatness. And I'm not saying it because I'm a mother, I'm saying it because it's the truth. Someone should know so much. And then she adds, and he carries it with such a plainness, such a passionate. Right? The Rebbetzin passed away Shabbos. She went to shul the first day of Rosh Hashanah. She wasn't feeling well the second day. She said, yesterday I went to shul and it affected my health, but I'm happy I went because it was wonderful to see my husband, my son blow shofar. And then Friday, Shabbos morning, she had some kind of a stroke. She passed away very late Shabbos after. The Rebbe Fabreng that Shabbos. The Rebbe sat in Fabreng while his mother was passing away. He ran to President Street, and they put her in an ambulance and took her to the hospital. It was called Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, no longer exists on the other side of Eastern Parkway. The Rav made the Rebbe get into the van and go to the hospital with his mother. The Rebbe davened Ma'ariv and I think said Kaddish in the hospital. The Levaya was the next day. There was very little Shiva. She passed away Vav. The Levaya was Zayin. Yom Kippur breaks the Shiva, so it was like 2.5 days of Shiva. A lot of people came. The Rebbe was very worried if he's allowed to go to mikveh at Yom Kippur. The Rebbe was there from. And that year, the Rebbe Fabreng every single Shabbos. The Rebbe was in Avelis. The Rebbe was not going to Fabreng during the week at all because he felt that his owl is not allowed to Fabreng during the week and not be happy. And the Elter Chassidim said he must. So every single time the Rebbe had a week at Fabreng, and that year he made a siyum of a Masechta. He finished a Masechta in Shas, which made it into a Yom Tov. So he was able to Fabreng. And that's when the Rebbe started saying the Rashi Sichos. The Rashi Sichos, the Rebbe said the schus of his mother. And the first one was Pashas Noach. And the Rebbe explained the Rashi. That the Rashi is speaking to children who are 5 years old. And therefore what he explains and how he explains it has to be on such a simple level that even a little child can understand it. At that Fabreng was standing a yid by the name of Rabbi Shmuel Lu. He had been 6 weeks before at the yahrzeit gathering of the Rebbe's father in her home. And as the Rebbe was talking about Rashi, and Rashi's tendency to make everything so plain and so simple, it flashed in his mind that the last thing he heard from the Rebbetzin was that my son is such a great person and he makes it all so plain. And now the Rebbe was saying that about Rashi. That the Rashi's style of teaching Chumash is that it's very, very plain. The Rebbe honored his mother on Ashir. When the Rebbe went to the oil, every time, before he finished with the oil, he would go over to his mother and say a few words. There's all kinds of examples of things the Rebbe did in the schus of his mother. And to say we can learn from the Rebbetzin, it would be nice. To say we can learn from the Rebbe is also nice, but we can certainly take a page out of the Kibbud Aim book from how the Rebbe respected his mother, and we would all be better for it. Okay, good night.